So I think we're all here for this webinar today. Good afternoon, morning, maybe even evening. Welcome to today's webinar on implementing sustainable ICT today. My name is Joost de Kluiver. I'm the Director of Closing the Loop, a global service provider for pragmatic circularity for tech. And also on behalf of Luis Neves, the CEO of GeSI, I'm very much pleased to see you all and such a turnout for this event. We have quite a list of speakers for you today, all crammed together in just 1 hour. And they'll be talking about a topic most of us like, some of us might even love, sustainability and circularity. But we'll be discussing the more practical side of those topics. I will now put you in the hands of Claire Hobby, Director at TCO Development, who's working on global purchaser engagement, and she will lead this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Joost, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you also to Closing the Loop for hosting this conversation. And if you haven't had a chance to check out the amazing on-the-ground work that Closing the Loop does in e-waste remediation, please go check them out. There's some great, inspiring, and very practical solutions there available to you. So welcome to our conversation today. As Joost mentioned, this is a sustainable IT is a topic that deserves our attention and that many of us feel very passionate about. And even if it's not something you deal with every day, it's something that's on our minds, just as IT users, IT purchasers. We have products that we buy, that we use, and that we need to deal with when we're done using them. And if we think about some very simple statistics, we generate over 50 million tons of toxic e-waste every single year on this planet. And less than 20% of that e-waste is responsibly recycled. So that alone gives us an idea of we need to do something now, and we need to do something also very long term. But today is really all about what we can do now. While we have this long-term goal of a sustainable life cycle in our minds, there are things we can do as organizations right now. And that's what we want to focus on today. So before we get into our keynote and our panel conversation, just a couple of housekeeping notes. We will be stopping at a couple of points during the session to get your questions. And on your screen, you'll see at the bottom, on the right-hand side, there's a Q&A icon. If you have a question for any of our panelists, go ahead and enter your question there. We will get to as many of them as we can. And for those we don't get to today, we will make sure to capture them and get back to you either maybe through a blog post or even directly to make sure you get an answer to your question. So questions in the Q&A. And also, at the end of our session, we really want to have a dynamic back and forth with some of those questions and answers. So the team at Closing the Loop will keep an eye on your questions and make sure to bring them to the panelists at that end session. So the second half of this session is really all about you guys diving into some conversations. So our program, we're going to have a keynote address from Stef Kranendijk, and we're very thrilled to have him with us today. Then we'll have our panel conversation with some experts from MBO Netherlands, from Ingram Micro, from Rabobank and TCO Development. So there are going to be some very practical solutions and experiences from the field in sustainable IT. And then we'll go into our discussion and Q&A. Now, when everyone registered for today's session, I believe you were asked a question: what does sustainability mean to you? What's the first thing that comes to mind? And I always think word clouds are so fun to just get a feel for where everybody's thinking is at. And great to see circular, right in there. And obviously environmental and sustainable are some of these feelings that are top of mind when we talk about this topic. So with that, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker today. And we're thrilled to have Steph Karnendijk with us. And some of you may know Steph as a pioneer in the field of the circular economy, the concept of cradle to cradle. Maybe he's best known for his work at GeSI, the flooring company, where he managed to lead a major transformation internally based on cradle to cradle principles. And I think what's really interesting to keep in mind when we're talking about IT, there's so many parallels with the issues we're dealing with other industries. Clothing and apparel and textiles and flooring are a few that are very, very interesting and that come to mind. So Steph, it's my pleasure to hand over to you. We will take a couple of quick minutes straight after Steph's presentation to grab a couple of quick questions, as I know he has to leave us today. But Steph, welcome.
Yes, hi there. Let me try to tell you in 10 minutes what we did at GeSI, and I can try to see what will be applicable for the IT industry. GeSI is a European leading carpet tile manufacturer. And when we bought it, I bought it together with a private equity house. It was rather boring in terms of design. And I started to work with circles of architects in order to make it a superior floor manufacturer, also in terms of design. That is the first thing we had to do. The other thing we did is we decided to go cradle to cradle. I worked together with Michael Braungart, who I got to know via a speech. And immediately after the speech, I went to him and I said, I want my whole company cradle to cradle. That didn't happen a lot to him because normally he has to do a lot of pitching. He came to my office. I had 12 people around, the top 12 around my table. And he talked about cradle to cradle and design for easy disassembly, because cradle to cradle is about making products from such pure materials that you can endlessly recycle them. He did that, he gave that speech, and I had 8 of the 12 people who were very, very enthusiastic, and 2 of the 12 people were very skeptical, my R&D director and the manufacturing director. After a couple of weeks, I got them on board as well, and then we simply started to design for easy disassembly, and we started to kick out toxic materials. We developed new backing. Normally the backing of the carpet tiles was bitumen. We developed polyolefin together with Dow. We had to work with a lot of our raw material suppliers to manage the chain. And we simply said, if you want to dance, then work with us. If you don't want to dance, then stay seated. We also developed a take-back system where we take back old carpet tiles and separate the yarn from the backing. We sold the bitumen to Heijmans, the road making company. And I was able to convince the largest yarn manufacturer of Europe to build a depolymerization plant where he depolymerized the old polyamide 6, the old nylon, into original monomer and made from that monomer new nylon, new polyamide 6, from which we made new carpet tiles. And that led to a situation that after 1 or 2 years, we could say that 60% of our global carpet tile volume is made of 100% recycled yarn. And these carpet tiles are laying across all those towers across the globe. Now, this was quite an achievement. And I tell you that if you do that, you are able to sell fantastically well to your customers because you appeal to their sustainability strategy and to their corporate responsibility strategy. And as a result of all of this, our market share in Europe alone doubled from 15 to 30%. And our profit was tenfold. Now, our base was very low. We only had 1% EBIT when we started, but okay, we made it to 10% EBIT and later on to 12 and 14% EBIT. Our private equity partner was very happy with it because they sold the business and got 8 times their money back for it, including the loans. And they made 20 times multiple on their ordinary shares. And we started to work with another private equity firm to make the next step. And after 2 years or 3 years, we were able to sell it to Tarkett, which is the largest floor manufacturer in Europe, a French quoted company. And I'm quite happy that they bought it because they themselves adopted the circular economy philosophy. I've been a couple of times in Davos explaining this whole cradle to cradle adventure with DESO together with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And the first time we did that, Ellen MacArthur presented a report of McKinsey. And in that report, it said that if the whole EU industry would work in the same way as DESO, that would save the European industry, the total European industry, $630 billion, which is representing 4% of the European GDP. That report had as title, Toward a Circular Economy. And that is the very first time in January 2012 that the word circular economy were used. Because Ellen didn't want to use the cradle-to-cradle term because she had to pay royalties to Michael Braungart and Bill Madonna. And by the way, I think it's a much better way of describing it. Now, I've told you this in a nutshell. Normally I take 20 minutes from this, but this is basically what the story is. And the way it sounds is like it's probably very easy. Well, I can tell you it's grinding. It's very, very hard work. And you have to make sure that the whole chain is managed. Not only your own manufacturing plant, but also all the suppliers. You have to make sure that they work with you together in order to make the materials non-toxic and in order to be able to take back the used materials. Now, thinking about this for the industry that you are in, I think it is a very urgent need that you as an industry will do something about it. And one of the things that needs to be done by the big suppliers is, of course, to design for easy disassembly. Now that is very easy to say. We did it with our carpet tiles, but I can imagine with mobile phones and laptops and iPads and so forth, it might be a bit more difficult. We have this initiative in the Netherlands, I believe, which is called Fairphone, which I believe is probably achieving it. But obviously in this industry, you want to achieve it while at the same time making leaps forward in terms of technology advancement and user friendliness. So there may be a bit of a challenge there. I cannot judge whether it is possible to design for easy disassembly. I think for a lot of product categories it is possible, but I leave it up to the experts of your industry to make that happen. But I can give you a couple of tips which I believe are very logical for your industry because the value of your products is relatively high. So for me, it seems that it should be relatively easy to set up a take-back system in this industry. And that is via introducing leasing as an option instead of selling phones and laptops, with the end being a deposit system. So anybody who will deliver their phone or their laptop will get back after the lease period a €500 deposit. Maybe it's a bit too high, I don't know, but I think it should be rather high in order to be able that people have the incentive to give it back. So that would be a wonderful way to set up such a system. And I'm not sure whether it is very nice for the closing the loop business model, because the closing the loop business model, of course, is a very good one, where the mobile phones get collected, then instead of immediately being recycled, being reused in the African continent, after which they are collected for recycling, after which they go to some recycling companies, which do it in, well, like companies like Umicore in Belgium, which do a terrific job. But obviously that is a totally different way of trying to get back your components than having to recycle products that have been designed for easy disassembly. What are the ways in order to motivate customers to work like this? Well, in my view, it is simply because of the fact that most companies today have a corporate social responsibility strategy and they have a sustainability strategy. Most of the professional big companies really want to make a headway in this sense. And from that point of view, because of that, it should not be so difficult in order to get these people to play ball with you. Yeah, there was a question is, what is the challenge to have people less talking about it and writing about it rather than doing it? Well, doing it, the whole DESO case is a fantastic example of doing things rather than only talking about it. And doing will only be achieved via making sure that the companies have the right leadership. You need the leadership to buy into this rather than that they see it as something they have to do as extra. It should become an integral part of the business strategy in order to make this happen. And if that leader is a believer, then that leader will also give a lot of PR activities and interviews and speeches to tell the story. That's what happened with DESO. Not only me, but also my team members at DESO. We went out there and talked about our transformation on a continuous basis, creating an enormous amount of PR. And by doing that, and by internally saying exactly the same story, but by giving these stories externally, there is a very healthy pressure towards the organization in order to be able to deliver. And that is very, very important. But the beautiful thing about being busy with this is that it grows the satisfaction within the company with our employees in a magnificent way. And we have been measuring that over the 6 or 7 years that I was involved with them. And because it feels great to do good. And that, I'm sure, also is very true for the IT industry.
Steph, I'm wondering if, just looking at our time, if we could, is there any final point that you wanted to make, or do we have time for a question or two?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing your pioneering experience at DESO. And I have one question I'm hoping you could answer that's come in from one of our attendees. In your, as far as you know, how much of the flooring industry was able to follow your good example after you made this transformation?
Well, I can tell you that all of the carpet tile companies and flooring companies have become very, very, very busy in implementing the circular economy. When I started at DESO, my global sales force came to me and said, what are we doing about sustainability? Because apparently we never talked about that. And I appointed a sustainability director and asked him to find out what it is that we did in terms of sustainability. And then he came back with the result that we saved a lot of energy, and we reduced some CO2 emissions, but that was it. And due to the fact that I got introduced to the cradle-to-cradle philosophy and started to implement it, and created a lot of PR and business with this, and also talked about that at fairs, we saw immediately after that a lot of our competitors doing exactly the same thing. And if you now go to a fair, for example, in Chicago, there is the largest interior floor fair in the world. You will see all the companies. Well, Shaw has been one of the pioneers as well, which is one of the biggest floor companies in the States. Mohawk is very active at that. Interface is active in that. And here in Europe, Desso, which by the way has been acquired by Tarkett, as I told you, all these floor companies have become very active. And I can't put a number at it, but I wouldn't be surprised if 60 to 70% of all the manufacturers are very active in executing the circular economy. But there are still, okay, sorry.
Oh no, thank you, Steph. I think it's a great story, and I see we've got a couple more questions that have come in, but I just want to make sure within our limited time today we can get to everybody. So what we might do is save those questions and find a way to get back to you with your individual answers. So
all right.
Thank you again, Steph. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a great day. Bye. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye. Great. So thank you to Steph. And now we will move forward. We'll move from the floor to the desktop, and we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into some very pragmatic and practical IT solutions with our panelists today. And it's my pleasure to introduce them to you. We're going to be beginning with Mark Bryan from MVO Netherlands, and then moving through handing over to Brent Berry from Ingram Micro, Abe Boersma from Rabobank, and my colleague Barton Finn from TCO Development. So without further ado, I'm going to throw it over to you, Mark, and take a couple of minutes and tell us your story and your best advice.
I will, thank you. Thanks, Steph Kranendijk, for the inspiring keynote. To introduce myself, I was a former program manager of circular economy for the Dutch national government. After doing that, I decided to shift to MVO Netherlands because I think I can make impact there promoting circular business models. That's my main focus. And I will give you a quick impression on circular economy policy and the position of MVO Netherlands. And doing that, I will share my screen. Hold on a sec. Here it is. Can you not, so you can see it, Claire? Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay. Why moving to a circular economy? That's for most of the people, is it maybe common knowledge? Just for a short introduction, the planet is losing its biodiversity by the massive use of resources. World population is growing and material consumption is still growing exponentially. This is not a little problem. It's one of the major challenges for manhood. We see now the global warming, one of the functions, but biodiversity will also become a huge problem, and things has to change and will change no matter how people will act. That's what we call it, the transition, because it's a very significant societal change, and it will require a significant societal change. The resources consumption is irresponsible, and that will mean eventually there will be a shift from linear behavior to a circular behavior. But we want to keep our prosperity, of course. We need prosperity, and we don't want to give in for sustainability reasons. That's why we better can prepare for the change than despair afterwards. Requires collective action, and that's why in Holland there is a national policy, and also now in the European Union there's a policy to make a shift from a linear system to a circular system. In the Netherlands, the program is, I made this in the Netherlands circular in 2050. It was taking about 34 years while it was made. And shifting to a circular economy in the Netherlands will mean that the market in the Netherlands will shift to a circular market. And the circular market is a market where there are no products and services that are linear anymore. Right now, a survey showed that 6% only of the Dutch market is circular. So there's a long way to go. It requires innovative business cases, and of course, it also requires linear business cases being expelled. For example, free plastic bags are forbidden in the Netherlands by law, and that makes a market for other business cases. This will happen more and more, and companies that will not go to circular business cases finally will lose their market share. That's what's happening in the Netherlands and what we see. So the position of MVO Nederland, it's an organization, derives from the point that it's difficult for a company alone to cooperate. Like Stef Kranendijk told you, cooperation is necessary. He said that you have to manage the whole supply chain and also take back systems to get your circular business model working. So that's difficult to do alone, especially in ICT, because world supply chains, so even there cooperation is more important. MVO Nederland is a neutral party and it contributes with its own ambition. MVO Nederland has a mission to contribute to a sustainable market in the Netherlands. What we do is we stimulate market development, and we do that by using transition management systems, mainly improving business conditions. And we do that not only through lobby in The Hague and in Brussels, but also we participate in governmental and financial programs to stimulate circular business models together with our partners. That's what we do, and while I'm panelist here. Thank you, Claire.
Thank
I'll
you,
give you back. Yep.
A few seconds. Thank you so much, Mark. And again, if you have questions, remember there's that Q&A field at the bottom. So feel free to enter your questions there, and we'll get to some of those at the end. Moving now over to Ingram Micro, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Brent Berry. And Brent, take it away.
Thank you, Claire. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. I am Brent Berry. I'm the current Executive Director for Client Services at Ingram Micro. What that means from our world, client services is really everything from go-to-market, account management, logistics, sales support, sales operations, and global onboarding. I've been in this space for over 20 years, whether it be tied to ITAD or reverse logistics. So kind of grown up in this area and gotten to see the shifts in the movement within our industry. And it's really interesting when you think about it. If you think about ITAD, right? We're going to talk about ITAD for a second. If you think about the ITAD market, right? Kind of where we started out 20 years ago, right? And looking at today, specific to sustainability and circularity, what's the difference, right? Where have we evolved to? And I think for me, going back 20 years and looking and comparing where we are today, the biggest transition is this shift that we've seen in the marketplace from a priority and a position perspective. And what I mean by that is 20 years ago, right, we were really paying attention. The industry was paying attention. It was growing. It was figuring its way out. It was kind of a new space. And it was all built around value recovery, right? How are we going to drive dollars back into a P&L? How are we going to drive dollars back into an economy? Now, right, today, the industry is much more aware, and eyes have been open. Companies are now paying attention to data management, risk management, right? And really importantly, the environmental obligations that we all have in managing all these assets that are flowing around the globe, right? The circular economy, all these assets that are getting put in and taken out on a day-to-day basis. Don't get me wrong, right? We are still fighting the fight against the value piece of it, right? That's still a big priority. But certainly we've made this shift to acknowledgement and visibility to be more focused on that sustainability piece of it. And so it's a good time for us to really continue to push awareness, education, and continue to drive this mindset of how do we drive and build a reverse supply chain, a services supply chain that has sustainability and circularity built into the foundation as a core component of it. If you look at Ingram Micro, everything that we do, everything that from an ITAD, reverse logistics, everything that we do is built around the 3 R's, right? The traditional 3 R's, right? Reduce, reuse, and recycle. For example, let's partnering with Close the Loop. It's a great opportunity for us to facilitate opportunities with our partners, our customers, drive compensation around pulling and managing those assets out and driving circularity within the environment that we live today. Managing the end of life, managing and really shifting from ITAD mindset to asset management, right? We want to manage that asset from beginning to end. If you think about Ingram Micro, we have a really unique environment, a really unique opportunity because we are the world's largest distributor, right? So we get access to the very, very front end, all the way down to the end of life, to managing that asset out of the process. So one thing that we've done over the last few years is really shifted our strategy from being an ITAD service provider to really being an asset management service provider. We want to manage that process from beginning to end, whether it's through the channel, whether it's direct, doesn't matter what type of product it is. How do we take those assets, put them in a scenario to where we are using every component, every piece of material, putting it back into that service supply chain, and ensuring that we are not having any product go back into the environment in a negative way. So I look forward to continuing the conversation, getting questions, and having a great webinar. So thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Always great to hear some global perspectives and also perspectives a little bit more from the industry side of things, which is incredibly important that the different market voices are actually reaching each other. So thanks for your insights. So I want to shift back to the Netherlands now, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Abe Beursma from Rabobank. So Abe, over to you.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks for having me. If you had asked me a couple of years ago, or you had told me that I would be a panelist in a so-called circular economy sustainability webinar, well, let's just say that I would have frowned upon it. I am responsible as a director for IT for the Rabo, serving a little over 45,000 people worldwide. I'm an IT guy. I was all about more power. You know, you couldn't have enough megawatts flowing through your data center. And in my world, the circular economy and the green movement, it was something a bit outside of us. It was something that didn't sound very rational. It wasn't very factual. You couldn't, in my world, it was not such a big deal. Now, what happened there is that obviously for those of us who know the Rabobank, it was founded a little over 100 years ago by farmers for farmers. We're a food and ag bank, and that means that you are part of the circular and the green movement. Steph talked earlier about leadership, and sometimes leadership also has to do with KPIs and steering things, right? So being part of the executive branch of the bank, suddenly as an IT guy, I was confronted with KPIs that pushed me into do something with circular economy, do something sustainable, do something green. It really forced me to look into it, but also being IT, it had to make sense, right? It had to add up. 1 + 1 had to equal 2. It had to be pragmatic. 2 years ago, or a little over 2 years ago, I stumbled across Joost, who ran the Close the Loop initiative. And actually, in 5 minutes, he told me a story that actually made sense to an IT guy. And so I embraced it. I started running with it. And I also felt the energy that is within it, within the company, within the Rabo. People started applauding this particular scenario that we put in place. And from it, we stemmed many different other parts where we actually said, look, IT can make a meaningful difference. And it can actually sell the story a lot better, including for all the IT engineers. It just makes sense. So you asked me earlier on, the key advice is in IT, it has to make sense. It doesn't, it has to be more than just a nice story. It has to add up, which it does for us right now. So, I'm very proud to be part of this this panel, and I want to encourage all of us that work in IT to embrace it, because it has beautiful opportunities, and I think we can make a very meaningful contribution. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Abe. I love your comment. It has to make sense and it has to add up. We'll be getting back to you on that one, because I think that's key for all of us in implementing some of these practices in our organizations. So great insight. Great. So moving on to our final panelist is my colleague, Barton Finn from TCO Development based in Brussels. And Barton, over to you.
Thanks, Claire. Hi, everyone, and thanks to TCO, to Closing the Loop, sorry, for the invitation to such an interesting panel. Really excited to be here. So Barton Finn with TCO Development, which is the organization behind the sustainability certification for IT products called TCO Certified. And within TCO Development, I'm part of the purchaser support team, which basically means that my key responsibility is to support purchasers in using our certification in their procurement contracts in order to drive a more responsible IT industry. So today, for my introduction, I would like to give a few words on our work and solutions around e-waste. But first, let me try to give you a really super condensed overview of what TCO Certified is all about. So in essence, the idea behind TCO Certified is to develop a tool, the certification, in order to enable purchasers to tackle and to address the different sustainability issues that are connected to the IT industry today. And how do we do this? Well, we do this by running and regularly updating TCO Certified, which is a sustainability certification for IT products that includes social and environmental considerations or criteria, and with those being developed under a life cycle perspective and for which compliance is independently assessed. That's really everything you need to know about TCO Certified. And I mentioned that the idea behind TCO Certified is to tackle the different issues connected to the IT industry today. So let's focus on e-waste. And regarding e-waste, as you mentioned in the beginning, Claire, we have at TCO Development, we have we identified two basic challenges. The first is that IT products currently have a lifespan that is too short, and which is one of the main reasons driving the growing e-waste stream that we produce each year. And the second challenge that we identify is that also most of this e-waste is not recycled responsibly today. And so with this in mind, we want at TCO Development to be able to drive progress on both ends of the spectrum. So if we look at the most upstream end, and here we're talking about the eco-design phase, we integrate in TCO Certified requirements for products to be more durable, to be more repairable, and to be more upgradable, with in mind the idea of being able to keep them in use as long as possible, and therefore to prevent them to become waste. So that's what we do at the most upstream level. And then we also want to drive progress at the most downstream level. And here we're talking about the recycling phase. Right. So what we do here is that we include in TCO Certified a way for purchasers to actually take responsibility for the e-waste they will be generating by giving them the availability to work and to address the e-waste that is already out there, that is already present. And so that's why we introduced our e-waste compensation program or solution, which is called TCO Certified Edge e-waste compensated, which is currently available for smartphones, tablets, and notebook computers. And what it does is that it basically requires for all certified products certified specifically for the according to this e-waste compensation program. It requires all products to be fully e-waste compensated in a responsible manner. And it just works as the traditional climate compensation models, except that in our case, we require an equivalent of e-waste products to be collected and processed responsibly in relation to the production and the manufacturing volumes of the certified products. So yeah, that's in a nutshell for my introduction, and we are really especially excited about this e-waste compensation program, as it's quite new, as it allows us to really tackle both ends of the spectrum, but also because it's the result of a great collaboration we've had with Closing the Loop, who has been the first approved collector within this e-waste compensation program. So that's it for me, Claire, for my introduction, and happy to take on any questions now.
Great, thank you, Barton, for giving us that overview of TCO certified. So it's a lot of information, right? Let's get to some questions. We have a few minutes here, and we've got some questions in the Q&A. Also, some of us have been receiving some questions online, offline here. So let's get to a few. We may not get to them all, but let's dive in. So a question from Mark, if he's there. Is Mark still with us? The idea of innovation and transitioning towards the circular economy. In your organization, do you see the role of innovation as a driver at all in driving your efforts further on the circular economy?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, innovation is very important, and it's good to stress that it's not only technical innovation, but it's also innovation on behavior. So it's also societal innovation, and promoting that, it requires a lot of other forces to go there. But sure, innovation is one of the main drivers. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Question for. Actually, I'm going to jump to a question we received for Abe, which actually points to this idea of something you said, Abe, about, you know, it has to make sense, it has to add up. And I think that's such a great takeaway. You work in a very large organization. So how do you feel you were able to convince your co-workers and your management to really commit and to get started on sustainability? What were your key learnings from that experience?
So I think one of the, you have to tell a simple story. One of the solutions that came into mind, we give corporately owned iPhones to our employees, and we see many companies struggle in retrieving that iPhone as a corporate asset because the companies believe that there's residual value there. We actually strongly encourage our people to hand those phones, for instance, to their kids or into the family to extend the life cycle of such a device. But in the end, any device will reach its technical lifespan. And we said, look, you can have this, you can give it to your kids as long as you return it once they're done with it so that we can properly take care of it. And we said, look, we want to do the same in Africa. And here's your new phone, here's a QR code, which would spark your interest. Go look at our storyline, go see what we do there. And actually that made a lot of sense for them.
That's a great story, very tangible, very practical, great feedback.
Thanks.
Yeah, great. Question, let me see. One for Barton. How can procurement have the highest impact on IT sustainability? So what's the role of procurement? What can they do to have their highest impact in the IT space?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. That's a really good question. And I would say that the role of procurement is really important since it's a bit the phase that sits at the border of a lot of things. It sits at the border of what the user will be doing with the device, but also of what happened with the device from a sustainability perspective during production. So procurement is really important because it's this kind of frontier moment where you can have an impact on what has happened before, and you do this by choosing and for more responsible product, but also by communicating this when you do your choice towards the industry. And on the other hand, it's also important because the moment and your procurement decision will also determine a lot of things that you will be able to do with your devices during the use phase. So you should also be paying attention to like the recyclability features of the devices, the energy consumption, and those type of things. So I would say that the role of procurement is indeed really, really important because it's a kind of moment where you can have impact on like what happened up in the supply chain and what you will be able to do in terms of circular IT management of your devices. Yeah.
Thanks, Barton. Brent, a couple of questions for you, and I'm thinking ITAD may be clear for many of our listeners, maybe not for all, so maybe explain a little bit about ITAD, but a specific question on that was also to explain how your asset management program works to incorporate sustainability, and how do you view that differently compared to, say, some other producers or OEMs that maybe just push product out into the market and then forget about it. Does that make sense? Yep.
Yes, ma'am, it does, absolutely. So real quick, just so to clarify, ITAD is IT asset disposition, right? And so that is really managing assets at end of life, right? So when a partner or customer of ours is taking assets out of their infrastructure, out of their network, what is happening with that asset? That's where we come in, we take care of that asset, we manage that asset, we manage the risk associated with the data, the liability, all that for our customers. So that's kind of ITAD in a nutshell. But really, why asset management, right? And if you think about, again, if you think about circularity and you think about sustainability, asset management for us is an expansion of and a growth off of the ITAD baseline, right? We don't want to just be an ITAD partner. We don't want to just be a ITAD service provider. We want to be an asset manager. Think about this. We have a platform, right, that's tied into our partners' ITSM, how they manage their assets, right? Their software for managing their assets. We're tied into that software, right? So now we're working at a platform level on the front end. We can tie asset services, asset management services to those assets as they're still in their infrastructure. And as they come out of that life cycle, right, it's a push of a button. It's automated. We can then we can kill that data. We can manage that data appropriately. We can bring that asset back in. And then we can take that asset, depending on, again, all the different components of that, where that asset fits in the life cycle. Maybe that entire asset goes back into the reverse supply chain, right? Getting back out into the secondary market. Or maybe it's not fit for that, but the components are. Now we're getting down to the parts piece of it, right? How do we facilitate to ensure all those components, all those parts are getting back into the network and not going downstream, right? So from an asset management perspective, and why we do that is it gives us control of that asset, the entire life cycle from beginning to end. Gives us, when you tie it back to sustainability, then it gives us that path of control, right? Now we are controlling that asset. We know from beginning to end, when we manage that asset through the whole life cycle, we control where that asset ends up, right? Our partners trust us to manage that from end to end so that they know they're not getting exposed. They know that their assets are ending up in reuse, right? How do we ensure that that product is getting back into the secondary market in the appropriate manner, the appropriate way? So asset management gives us that end-to-end view and control of that asset and process to ensure that that doesn't happen. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Brent. Very helpful. Just looking at the clock, we have 5 minutes remaining, and there's some really great questions coming in. Some of you are asking about carbon footprints and life cycle questions. So those are kind of our big questions. We're gonna record those and put some good answers together for the audience on that at a later date. But seeing we have such a short amount of time left, I want to just throw kind of a big question to our panelists and give them each a 15-second shot at giving some great advice. So you can pick your question. Someone asked in the chat box, what do you think the top sustainability challenges are for the IT industry? You can choose that question, Or you can choose, if you could tell the audience to do one thing, what would that be? So pick a question. Everyone has about 15, 20 seconds to answer. Ready? Anyone want to start?
I'll start. Thanks. 15 seconds is a short one. I think in IT world, you have to have a simple solution. You know, it's not a tree hugging experience. It has to make sense. And it can be. You can actually make money out of this, or you can actually play the technology game. Explain it in simple but meaningful words. That is crucial for IT. Otherwise, if they don't believe it, they're not going to follow you.
Great message. Thanks,
Yeah,
Abe.
and I'll jump in next. And I think the big thing I would want everybody to leave with is, you know, transitioning to this kind of world, right? This new worldview, this circular economy, circular environment. It's a vision, right? It is a visionary project for our companies, for our industry, for our culture, for our society. And the beauty of it is right now it's gaining traction. And by working together to really shift towards the circular economy, not only are we doing good for our companies, because it's true, right? There's value to be made in the circular economy, but we're doing right by people, by the planet, right? By the environment. And the reality of it is that there's electronics found in every practical component of life today. So we have a responsibility to start making this a priority. So jump in, step in, right? The key to solving many of these issues is just connectivity, engagement, and being a part of it, and opening your eyes and wanting to play a role. So
yeah.
Jump in and play that role.
Great takeaway. So sustainable business is good business, and it's the right thing to do. So great takeaway. Thanks, Brent.
Let me be next.
Yes.
Okay. Linear business will end. That's a fact. So that's a chance. The trick is to find and develop circular business models and to make a smooth shift from the linear business model to circular business model. So my point is start developing potential circular business models that are appropriate for your company and find partners in this development.
Great takeaway. Collaboration, shifting to new business models, and asking the difficult questions, not being afraid to get started with something we hear a lot.
Start.
Get started with something.
Yep.
Okay, Barton, you have
actually that was going to be my advice. So I think that everything we discussed is a good expression that a lot of solutions are already out there and available for you to implement. So yeah, if I have something that I would like you to take out of today's session is to really get started. I think that in a lot of cases we try to, and we want to be perfect and we want to have everything at the same time. And I think that here my advice would be to just start, even if it starts small, with as Abe put it, with something that makes sense. But I think that getting started is what is the most important. And then from there, just see how you do and adapt based on your results. But getting started is the most important thing. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Barton. Don't be afraid. Get started with something. There are good solutions out there. Well, thank you, panelists. A lot of great takeaways and practical solutions. And I know that we'll all make ourselves available for any follow-up questions moving forward. So thank you all. And finalizing, I'm not sure, closing the loop team, if there was something you wanted to show. Yes, thanks so much for attending today. I'd like to thank our hosts, GeSI and Closing the Loop, for hosting this conversation today. I hope we can do it again really soon. There will be a recording of today's session that will be sent to you in the next few days. In the meantime, you can reach out to Closing the Loop at info@closingtheloop.eu. And I wish you a very good rest of the day, evening, morning, wherever you might be. Thanks again.